Hello, church. Welcome to the next Exodus mini. Today we're going to be looking at the ninth plague, the plague of darkness, found in Exodus chapter 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, and there will be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. One person could not see another, and for 3 days they did not move from where they were. Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived. Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go worship the Lord. Even your families may go with you. Only your flocks and herds must stay behind." And Moses responded, "You must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings to prepare for the Lord our God. Even our livestock must go with us. Not a hoof will be left behind, because we will take some of them to worship the Lord our God. We will not know what we will use to worship the Lord until we get there." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was unwilling to let them go. And Pharaoh said to him, "Leave me. Make sure you never see my face again. For on that day you see my face, you will die." As you have said," Moses replied, "I will never again see your face." So as we once again kind of get into the end game here, as we creep up to number 10, which is the ultimate point, we see a couple more gods that are being addressed by God in the plagues. And the main one is Ra, but there's a few others that just sort of emphasize this reality that the people of Egypt worship the sun gods, right? Or sun gods is maybe how I should say it instead of the sun gods. But there's a couple different sun gods. There's Horus, who is the god of the sunrise. There's Atem, who is the god of the midday sun. And then there is Atum, who is the god of the sunset, right? And so you have just these various points in the sky where there's different deities who serve that particular point of the day, right? But then there is Ra, or Amun-Ra, just kind of, again, depends on when and who you're reading, in what context you're reading, or whatever. But Amun-Ra is the supreme deity in Egypt. He's the supreme deity in Egypt. He's the sun god, who all these other gods are ultimately serving. And Egyptians believed that Amun-Ra was their creator. He brought them into existence. He was the one who gave them life, and who gave them the land and the fertility, and really everything else that happens. All of the other gods within Egyptian mythology are ultimately doing so at sort of the behest of Ra, right? So it's very, very an important figure in Egyptian mythology, in the Egyptian pantheon. But Ra is claimed to have said, obviously we don't necessarily believe that that's what's happening here, but Ra says of himself, "I am the great God who came into being of himself, he who created his names, he who has no opponent among the gods." And this is a quote that's given from, it's called "The Cult of Ra, Sun Worship in Ancient Egypt" is the name of the book, by Stephen Quirky. But that's a reference just simply to something that has been found in ancient Egypt. This idea that Ra believes himself to be, or claims himself to be, or the people of Egypt are saying of Ra, this is who he is, right? So he is an incredibly important figure. And as we've increased, like I said, through the plagues, what have we noticed? We've noticed this kind of increasing intensity, but it's not like a linear increasing intensity. It's exponential increasing intensity, kind of showing us that we're getting to the final point. We're getting to that final plague, the final defeat that is going to make the difference. Okay, increasing in intensity. One other maybe thing of note as we look at this last little section is that Pharaoh Pharaoh is understood to be the son of Ra. Okay, and this is why, again, this is this increase in intensity, but also because when we get to next week, or when we get to the next plague, the 10th plague, we'll find that Pharaoh is the object of attack, right? But Pharaoh is sort of the son of the god, right? Which is a little notation there for us as Christians. It's one of the things that people sometimes point to and go, oh, well, you just stole that idea from Egypt or Babylon or different places where there's different children of the gods and they're important figures. But that's kind of a whole nother subject. But I guess the point that I'm really trying to get at is there's this kind of additional attack point, that it's not just that Ra is being defeated, but it's also the father of Pharaoh, right? So it's getting closer and closer and closer to home as we get further along in these plagues. And Ra is utterly defeated in this plague. So let's look at a few of these verses to kind of see what's going on, right? First and foremost, the darkness, right? So notice Moses does not go into the presence of Pharaoh first, like I mentioned last week in the 7th plague, that each of the thirds are where Moses just does the thing, right? So Moses just simply stretch out your hand, and then the darkness can be felt, and it lasts for 3 days. So some suggest that the plague of the darkness is actually just an eclipse. Well, that's not really true, or we can certainly say that doesn't fit with the description here, because number one, darkness isn't felt in the darkness of an eclipse, right? It is much different. We experienced an eclipse back in April, and many of us we sat outside and we watched the eclipse and we saw it. But what was the reality? Yes, it was really neat that there was darkness in the middle of the day. It was incredible to see the majesty of God's creation. But at the same time, it'd really be hard for us to imagine somebody even realizing or recognizing the fear that maybe would come from a person who doesn't know that an eclipse is a thing, right? So ancient world doesn't have a map of the solar system and how the sun and the moon interact and all this kind of stuff. However, we could recognize maybe that induces a lot of fear, but this is not how you're going to describe the events of a 10-minute eclipse, right? Yeah, the sun was getting a little bit darker as it got closer and closer to that total eclipse moment. But at the same time, if you're not really paying attention, you probably wouldn't even have noticed it, right? But here, it's a darkness that is happening that is complete darkness. It's darkness that you can feel. It's, if you've ever been to a cave, right, like a mammoth cave or something like that, and they go and they turn off the lights and you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Right? It's that kind of darkness, a darkness that's it's tangible, right? But also it's a darkness that's so deep that it's blotting out even the stars, right? So it's not just an eclipse, solar eclipse. It's something so much deeper. It's so much more oppressive. And again, this is what we're recognizing with Ra, like he is the god of the sun, and for the sun to be turned off, for light to just simply be turned off, is a pretty powerful statement from the Lord. It was right. It says no one could see each other, and so for 3 days they just stayed where they were. They just stayed where they were, right? It's this idea of total fear bringing a complete halt to the economic machine that is Egypt. But again, also notice that this is now starting to get to the point where maybe the question that is being asked, or maybe the thought that's going through the heads of the Egyptians is, okay, well, yeah, this God Yahweh, he can defeat these other sort of lesser gods, but Ra, he's still all powerful. And so now there is such a level of fear, there's such a level of defeat that happens for the people of Egypt, that something is shifting, it's breaking, right? Not one person could see another, and they did not move for 3 days. Right? That's the idea here, that this is halting their existence. Israel is spared, right? If we go back to that, Israel is spared in this moment. Extremely interesting question that we could ask is, what does that even look like? How does Goshen have light and the rest of Egypt doesn't? Is there bleeding? Is there bleed through? Is there like a line in the sand that darkness almost is just sucked out of the air? And I think, like for me, that's almost what I picture, is that darkness is just simply being sucked out of the air. To the response, right? So what is the response from Pharaoh? So Pharaoh summons. He doesn't repent like he does in the 7th and 8th plague, but there is a growth of his maybe bargaining that's happening, right? So, okay, yes, you can go, but just your families. Leave your flocks. Don't take any of your animals, right? You can go, almost as if he's going, I know you'll come back and get your flocks, because that's very much, it's a lot of money. But we look at then Moses' response. So Pharaoh responds this way, but then Moses responds, he's like, no, we have to take everything. We have to go and we have to take everything. We must have sacrifices. And we don't know what we will need until we get there. We don't know what we need until we get there. Now, that's a really interesting, it's a really important thing that we ask. A lot of people question, is Moses being deceptive here? And maybe on the one hand, maybe we have to say yes, but that's missing the point of what's happening here. Again, as I said before, as I said early on in the 10 plagues, notice where Pharaoh is in his hardness of heart, in how he responds to what's going on. But it is also showing us the difference between Pharaoh's movement and God's steadfastness. God says, no, this is what I demand of my people and of you in releasing my people. And Pharaoh has started way over here. I'm not letting you go. I'm not even letting your family, your men go, and then your men can go, and now your men and children can go, and your men and women and children can go. You can't take your animal, right? Like he's moving towards the Lord and towards this reality. However, God does not move. And so then Pharaoh ends with this last, or Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And I say this last hardening of Pharaoh's heart, not because there's not some more hardening that's going to happen in the 10th plague and after, but here in this like ending of the lead up, we see this kind of movement of Pharaoh's hardness. He's not willing to let them go. One more note before we get to the 10th plague, which we'll actually look at more serious then, but I want to point it out here. Pharaoh he's furious, as you would expect. He's furious, and he says, leave me and make sure you never see me again, because when you do, you will die. And Moses' response is, you're right, I will never see you again. And that is maybe a little pin that we put in as we end this 10th plague. We'll see you in the next one.